what's going on here?
So right now I'm doing an experiment with these 300-gallon pots, and I'm gonna see how effective this system will be in doing a very densely populated vegetable production. I'm gonna start, I think, with basil in this pot. So what I've done is this pot, I'd say that's about 18 inches, huh?
Yeah.
18 inches, probably about a 5-foot diameter. And it's 300 gallons in volume. So to fill this up, you could use soil. We use a lot of mulch. So I'd say right now it's a little over 60% mulch at the bottom. Along the edges, we've started to spread some potting soil. And the reason that we did that is we really want these walls to be full so they're standing up. Because what happens is you see the bees, if you don't fill them up all the way, they just start to flap over.
Right.
And then in some areas you're not getting enough exposure to sunlight, and it's hard to water under those flaps. So you want this thing to kind of be leveled out as much as you can get it to be. So I put in mulch. I just added a little bit of goat manure, compost, just to sort of inoculate the mulch. The goal is to have this just continue to be used by adding maybe some soil occasionally as it begins to decompose and break down. But ultimately what you want is this thing to be very highly active media. So we wet this down, we got the edges somewhat filled out. How we want them. And so what I'm going to do now is just continue to fill this in with potting soil towards the center.
Got it. And what are you going to primarily, you said this was going to be basil?
Well, I'm going to start with basil.
Right on.
But this is going to be something that we can continue to use from season to season.
Nice.
And I like these. I like the concept. This is the amount of space that most people will actually be able to operate in. It's not going to be too invasive in terms of how it affects your property, and it's also at this scale pretty easy for somebody to manage. You can reach all the way to the center if you need from the outside.
Right.
And
yeah, these things are great. How much do these things cost? The actual pots?
These
Fabric
pots, I think you can get these pots for like 40 or 50 bucks.
Nice.
I have to research that to make sure. But it's something, hopefully, if this all works out, I'm going to try to make sure I have some available if people want to get them on the website.
Nice.
But these grow pots are very popular in the cannabis industry. People use them a lot. So I know they're effective. I know I've seen people be successful with them.
So what's the advantage? You said that obviously it doesn't affect property values. It's not a permanent installation.
It's not a permanent installation. It's easy to sort of contain your environment. They actually seem like a much more effective way to conserve water when you're just kind of spraying instead of having to flood a big area of property, even using emitters. I've seen people use emitters and be very successful. And I've also people just, if they have time, just spray. So what we'll do is just go in. I like to use this black gold because it's organic. It's produced by a company called Sungrow, but it's natural and organic. It has a good mix of fertilizer. It's not neutral. It's got a good mix of fertilizer and soil. dipped in a little bit, but
There's another one here. Oh, you got multiple. Okay.
I've always had good germination rates with this soil. I think it's really high value and clean, and I think it's worth might be a little more than some of the potting soil you can buy at the regular hardware store, but I think it's a good product generally.
And that's another aspect of what you're doing that you want to be clear on too, right? About providing examples of how people can do this on their own.
Exactly. Because I believe that in terms of sustainability and nutrition, you're much better off having some level of control over the food that you eat. Whether that be supporting your local producer through, farmers markets or stores that try to support local producers.
Or CSAs like Taylor Hood.
Or CSAs like mine, where you're buying directly from the producer, or a collective of producers, or cooperative. And so, just having that proximity to the source, I think makes a huge difference. And I want to encourage more people to try things like this if they can, if they have the time, if they have the resources. I think it's well worthwhile.
Definitely. And that's another thing that we've talked about in the sit-down format is just recognizing that sometimes our intuition about what the actual resistance to an idea or a system is not necessarily always going to pan out to be accurate. So you got to keep trying different things to hone in on and frankly, different people will have different types of resistance. So if you can if this makes sense to somebody, it's like, oh hey, I've got a balcony, I can put one of these on my balcony, or whatever. It's doable.
It is. If you can't lift it, if you can't lift the bags, it's
right.
You can get somebody to help you out just to get it set up. But pretty, in terms of like principle, understanding how this works, pretty simple. So like I say, I started off with mostly mulch. It's pretty lightweight material. It fills up one of these things pretty good, and it is an organic compostable material that will break down over time. Like I say, the whole idea is to create a media source that continues to serve you in more of a perennial way, like you're not wanting to have to keep doing this over and over. And the bags do eventually start to break down, but I don't know how long that's going to be. I think that has a lot to do with their exposure to conditions, how well they might be contained. You might be able to put something around them to protect them a little bit on the outside, but they are also breathable, so you don't want to inhibit that. So you don't want to put something around it that doesn't allow this thing to actually breathe and exhaust some oxygen from within, because then you create an anaerobic environment which can create all kinds of bacteria and problems for your plants. So we got this thing filled in. I'm just wetting this down a little bit just so it's somewhat stable. You see our good friends, the butterflies.
Yeah, the butterflies are coming to say hi.
Showing up to find out what they're going to be able to eat soon. I don't know that they love basil. And so now we got it pretty much prepped and ready. I got some good balance of nutrients in it, and it's filled up I probably could add some more soil, but I think I'm okay. It's mostly standing up the way I want it to. And if the soil starts to recede or go down, you can always add a little more soil, especially around the edges. That's where you really need it. So I'm going to use some of these Italian basil seeds. This is from this company, Botanical Interest, and it's just their large Italian basil. You can see these seeds are really small. This packet's probably going to be plenty for this unit, and so you just want to be generous with how you distribute the seeds, but also don't be too try to make sure it's not so concentrated so you're getting everything in the same place. But you want to cover as much area, and there's better ways to do this. I just tend to not have any of these little shakers and stuff like that people use, but you can find these things at gardening stores and places like that just make it easier. Like I say, you see I'm covering this just from one side basically, which makes it very practical.
Yeah, and you're tall, but you're not Wilt Chamberlain. I mean,
I am not Wilt Chamberlain.
About, what, 6'1", 6'2"?
So many ways I'm not Wilt Chamberlain. But yeah, I'm just 6 feet.
6 feet.
We'll call it 6 feet.
So a reasonably average sized person could do this easily by themselves. Cool.
And so what I'll do now, hopefully, is cover it just to hold those seeds in place. I'm going to put down a little peat moss, and what this does is it'll help keep these seeds from blowing around too much, but it'll also help to retain some of the moisture in the soil. And that's what you want to make sure you have, especially to start off a project like this. It absorbs water. It also breaks down very well, and it's also approved for organic production. This is a windy day, as you can see.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Like, generally, you don't want to be doing too much seed spreading on a windy day, but because this area is such a smaller area to cover, it's not going to affect you with so much. Just depending on the seeds. Really light seeds like lettuce seeds, you might have to wait till it's not a windy day to put those in. So now we got that covered in peat moss. Add some more water just to.
So, are there alternatives to the peat moss in this kind of an equation? Like, can you use coconut coir or some other mix?
Coir. You can use, yeah, I would say coconut coir or peat moss. Pretty good. I mean, sawdust might be, if you know where it's from.
Oh, interesting.
Just for purpose of what we're using it for. I'm trying to get this pressure on the sprayer to not be so powerful.
Right.
Knocks all the peat moss out. And this can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, depending on your water pressure. Just getting just the right amount of spray before it decides it's not enough spray to even push it out. But, that's about what you want. You can also use just one of those handheld sprayers, which might be more effective with something like this. But I use this because it was right here. I think overall it's going to do a pretty good job sort of containing, holding this water in place. while these seeds set. And so you don't want it to be so heavy that you're impeding the germination process with the seeds.
And in terms of, if say somebody was in a situation where they didn't have acres to try to be super self-sufficient on, but they were looking for ways of augmenting their other sustainable eating habits, like supporting CSAs and farmers markets and stuff like that, what would you, an extreme example of what not to do would be growing things like grains, and trying to do something with that on a small scale would be a nightmare. But what would you recommend instead?
Depending on the scale. If somebody just had an apartment and they didn't even have a balcony, all they had was a windowsill, I'd get some trays. I'd get some trays and start doing some microgreens.
Nice.
Because that's something that they're high in all of the right antioxidants. They're basically a superfood. They can be a little more expensive. Well, if it's just you growing them for yourself, it actually works out pretty good. Because if you've ever bought microgreens, you know how much they cost. And so the cost of seed is really what drives that, because the idea is with seed generally, it's like you're going to get to a certain volume and weight that makes it make sense. But with microgreens, since they never get to be that volume and weight, but they're super dense in terms of nutrition, you kind of sacrifice that weight volume for how much actual nutrition you're going to get, per square inch in microgreens. So if you did a tray, a typical, like 18 by 11-inch tray, with a little bit of soil and just some seeds on the top, and keep watering it, you have a good amount of microgreens. And if you continue, if you have two, you can always have a decent supply, because you're only going to harvest what you plan to eat immediately, and sometimes you can get a couple harvests off of a seeding, depending on where you cut. So if you cut, not too far down, about halfway, you might get some that come back. A lot of people do. The more you do that, though, the less you have in terms of nutrition density, but you'll still have probably more than, of course, if you weren't doing it at all, and probably still equivalent to what you actually get in a larger volume produce. So,
and in a grow bed like what you've got here, what would you suggest would be the most bang for your buck in that context? That same person that's looking to, do as much as they can on their own.
If somebody had one of these, you can grow at least three different things at one time in this. So I could grow chard, I could grow kale, and I could probably grow spinach. Enough for me and my family, for weeks, probably in one of these units.
Nice.
Yeah. And so the way that I see it, the way I have it set up, I'm probably going to use all of these at once. If I had 4 of these, I'd make it a seasonal grow. So, I might, if I was doing it outdoors, I might take into consideration, the ambient conditions. I might build a hoop over it and cover it with some plastic if I needed to in the wintertime. But that's another thing. It's like you can actually start using this. If you're not using it to grow food, you can actually start using it as a composting area. You can actually start building compost right in this pot, with the intent of using it later. So you don't have to move that compost around. You can actually just kind of agitate it a little bit and maybe add some more potting soil And that's how you continue to use these and sort of recycle them to their fullest advantage.
Yeah, one of the principles that made a lot of sense to me in terms of permaculture was whatever it looks like you're growing up top, the main thing that you're growing is the soil, the microbiome of the soil. So the rule number one is don't do anything that's going to undermine that process. So things like fertilizer, adding things that pesticides, any of that kind of stuff. What else would you want to not do if this is your little permaculture plot?
Well, yeah, you don't want to disrupt it too much. So the principle would be just to keep adding on top, as opposed to trying to dig in there and twist it all over. People like to do that with soil. They love like tilling, like because it feels good and soft, and you know the plants like that, but they don't need it to be that loose. They're very resilient. You know, we've seen plants growing through the cracks in concrete to give you some idea of like what plants can do, what seeds can do. So they don't need you to have like a totally loose flower like soil mix, but what they do need is the nutrients, and so that's what you want to continue to build in a space like this.
Nice.
Is as much nutrient density as you can develop over time, and that density overall also allows you to put more food in it, so you don't need to space as much. You can have a ton of food just kind of jammed up right next to each other, but because it has that level of depth that it has, it's going to be able to reach for a lot of those nutrients as they start to move to the bottom, and they don't need to spread as much. So you can have a very dense area of food in a small space, and it'll still get all the nutrients that it needs.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, and to be clear, just since I invoked permaculture, we know that this is not permaculture in any real sense of the term, but both of us are sympathetic to that approach, and you can adapt all of these things to whatever scale you're working.
Absolutely. So, I mean, my dream would be for this thing to completely decompose over time, and these just become a bed, and you continue to use the same practices over time.
Nice. Okay, we'll leave it there for now.
All right.